Hi and welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Troster. I'm the manager of Ella. I'd like to welcome you to our event today and tell you a little bit more about Ella. So Ella is an accelerator at York University that is helping to support women entrepreneurs by giving them access to mentorship, peer support sessions, access to subject matter experts, and a whole list of other resources to help them grow their businesses. And every month we invite experts from the community to come in and talk about practical tips to grow businesses, essentially. But before I begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. So since this meeting is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory upon which you are. We ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Patrice Pollack. Patrice is the creative director at Fuse Create, an independent creative agency that's based in Toronto. With over 10 years of experience, Patrice has had an extensive and exciting career pushing creative boundaries with a strategic lens, connecting several contacts and companies across the globe in Europe and North America. We have the pleasure of hosting her today to learn more about her insights on the net worth of your network. Welcome, Patrice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really, really excited to have you here. And I think we're just going to kind of dive right into it. Let's start off with kind of learning a little bit more about you, Patrice. Tell us about you.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Thornhill with 3 younger brothers. One of which was a childhood actor. And I think that's the reason I landed in advertising. I mean, I would go to the sets of the commercial shoots and I was sort of mesmerized by everything that was happening behind the camera. I loved seeing how the storyboards were coming to life, like the sets, just the people all working together. And it sort of informed my decision to go to the University of Western Ontario, where I was enrolled in the MIT program, which is the Media Information Technoculture program. But while there, I kind of changed course and I ended up leaving Western with a degree in philosophy and 1 class short of a minor in psych. And I mean, what I really took from that was how interesting I found the study of human behavior, but I couldn't quite figure out how that would marry up to what I did in the working world. And so after I graduated Western, I ended up spending the summer working on a cruise ship. And it was the first time in my entire life that I left home and went somewhere where I knew no one. It was fascinating and scary, but also for me, it was the first moment where I felt like the people that were around me knew me in that moment and for no other reason. And it was a really interesting sort of way to show myself, you know, where you're not sort of defined by who you were. And from there, I ended up traveling Australia for a year. It's actually where I met my husband, though we weren't together at the time. We reconnected again, network, when he came to Canada 8 years later on a work holiday visa. But after Australia, I ended up coming back to Toronto, where I went back to school and studied advertising at OCAD. And from OCAD, I ended up working at J. Walter Thompson, which is now Wunderman Thompson. I worked in New York, and then in the Toronto office. I moved to One Method, where I was the associate creative director there. And now I'm at Fuse Create as the creative director. And every move in my career, I say, is a methodical one. I'm a little bit of an anomaly in advertising, as I haven't really jumped from shop to shop to shop to shop, but instead I've based my decisions largely on the people I'm working with and for. Culture for me is so important. In fact, it's almost everything. And so the people that I've come to sort of gravitate towards and work with have sort of defined the moves I've made.
That's incredible. And I think it feeds really well into today's theme, which is all about relationships and network. So, thank you for sharing your very, very interesting story. Yeah, and non-typical in a lot of ways. I'm really excited to kind of hear more about your insights about networking, relationships, and kind of how best to leverage them. To that end, can you talk about a time where you've kind of leveraged your network connections to support either an event or project or initiative that you were working on, and what it meant for that project or initiative?
Yeah, I actually, most recently, this happened in a larger than life way, and the story behind it is my best friend is the operations manager for a nonprofit called Real Start. And Real Start is an organization that educates, empowers, and inspires underrepresented youth to change their world through film. They work along A-list talent to sort of craft and create a short film that's about an issue that impacts their community directly. So from script all the way through to post-production, they learn just how important it is to tell their stories. And, she was talking about to me just personally, just about the organization, but the struggles that they were having to make waves with little awareness and zero budget, meaning zero budget to amplify through media, zero budget to create any content to really show the world, what they're doing for these kids. And it's an organization that's founded by Evan Goldberg, who's quite well known, but founded and funded, meaning outside of their doors, there really was an opportunity to build a donor base for future fundraising efforts. So, I said to her, this is amazing. And I brought it to Fuse, and I said, this is what they're doing. And really everyone felt so passionately that this was a project we wanted to invest in, as in Fuse wanted to help them. But I knew that in order to make waves and to sort of create content that people would care about, that I would have to lean on my network to make it happen, because there was no money. And it's when I picked up the phone and I called Marnie Lufspring, who had recently opened a brand new production company called Feels Like Home, and told her all about the project, what we wanted to do. And it was because of that relationship and sort of the trust and the friendship that we had built. She was in, jumped in, there was no question about the fact that she wanted to make this happen. And so, she single-handedly got the best in the business to be involved. And they were people that I also knew as well, that I had worked really closely with on many occasions. And I think it's because of the relationships that we had that we were able to make it work. And I think one of the things is to really trust the people that you're working with. I say all the time, you don't hire Spielberg and tell him how to direct. If you trust the people that you're working with, magic will happen. And so it was really about leaning in and working with people that you really like, but that also trust and respect and know the kind of work that you're capable of. And so when that happens, and when you all come to the table, for us, that's what happened with Real Start, and the content that we were able to create because of that. Sort of, I think, blew everyone's socks off.
I think, that's a great example in practice of how, the magic can happen kind of thing. I know that, that people can be intimidated by the concept of networking. I know I certainly am to a certain degree. You talked about the trust aspect being an important part of it. What other kind of practical tips do you have for people who are looking to kind of leverage their network to amplify projects or their business? What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that like a lot of people look to their network as sort of as a way that their network can help them. And what I would say is that a network is a connection, is a relationship that goes both ways. And so if you're going to leverage anything, you're doing it because it's a genuine connection that can not only help you, but can help them. And I think that that's something that that we need to be reminded of time and again. There's a lot of people that try to connect with me on LinkedIn and don't even put a personal message, when they're trying to reach out. And so I'm left wondering, well, why is it that you want to connect with me? What is it that you think I can offer you? And what can you do for me? I mean, if a relationship goes both ways, I want to understand how our relationship is going to be formed. And so you'll see this theme sort of coming through as we continue this conversation, is it's all about the quality of the relationships and less about how many relationships you have.
I think that, your point about the mutual benefit to kind of both parties is absolutely key. And a lot of times when we're working with entrepreneurs, for example, especially women entrepreneurs, they see it as burdensome in some ways. But the one thing that we have to remind them is that, relationships, especially in business, it is a two-way street, and your company can bring your customers value. And that's why you're approaching these people, because you feel like you can contribute something to their company. You feel like you can reduce some kind of pain for them, and you have a solution that addresses that pain. So I think that the mutual benefit aspect of it, absolutely true. And, I think another reason why people are intimidated by networking is maybe sometimes they don't feel like they have something to bring to the table in exchange, especially people who are very early on in their careers. And, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think like at the end of the day, you're a brand. And when you're connecting with your network, even if you don't feel like you personally have something to bring to the table, your thought leadership is something you can bring to the table, and the content that you're sharing and the comments that you're making all reflect who you are. And so what I feel like is that like-minded people will gravitate to you. You shouldn't have to try so hard. And I think that when like-minded people like what you have to say, using LinkedIn as an example, you're engaging with them that way. So it doesn't always need to be like a direct message that you're sending. It can be sort of more open-ended in that the content that you're putting out there and the posts that you're putting out there that inspire are also promoting conversation. It's just doing it differently. And so for me, it's like the conversation shouldn't feel generic. They should feel like they're there for a reason. And you're putting thought into the way that you're representing yourself and your brand.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because I'm sure we've all suffered from this, but you get one of those requests, you reluctantly accept because, again, you don't have context around the connection and why the person wants to connect. So you reluctantly accept, and then only to be bombarded with sales messaging the next day saying, this is what I'm selling, kind of thing, not with any consideration for like what you might need and whether or not it's a right fit from a relational standpoint. So in terms of connecting, you talked a little bit about the idea of, sharing content. It may be indirect. What other ways can people create that connection or relationship? How do they nurture that?
I mean, I think like we should, and I'm talking we as in women, because I think we are a little more passive in terms of how we're reaching out to people, to me, it's actually a really good thing because there's some thought that's going into it. And so reaching out to people, and whether it's through email or LinkedIn, should happen sort of right after the initial connection. So let's say you were at a virtual event and you met someone that you felt like, yeah, this is someone that I really, I feel like there's a lot to say. There's a lot that we have, in common. Reach out to them and don't wait. Send a follow-up note. And again, like it goes back to the personalization. What was it about the connection that meant something to you? Like bring it back to a moment that you felt to make it personal. And I think like sending check-in emails is awesome, but at the same time, they don't need to come all the time. Like make sure that you're not bugging, that your emails and your messages are valuable. And that could include news about what you're doing. It could include awesome things you're working on. It doesn't always have to go back to, oh, I'm so glad we connected. It's like, I'm really excited about this. I feel like this is something that you would also find exciting too. You could also, like, if you're working somewhere that puts on, for instance, our agency puts on different events. We have different speaker series. So inviting them to those too is also a way to add value. And I also like, another thing is we have to remember we're people. Like we're humans. We're not just connections in a business sense. And so a lot of people are scared to like add people, let's say, on social media. But I actually think it's a way for us to dive deeper into who that person is on a more personalized level and really be able to relate to them, again, human to human and less business to business.
No, I love that. I love that as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why, despite the fact that, all of the events that we're going to as of late are digital, and I'm sure there are differences, and we'll kind of jump into that in a second. But I love the fact that I get a sense of who you are, Patrice, by looking at your surroundings. You know what I mean? And that's something that in-person events, we didn't have that lens to kind of like learn more about the person. So that's something that I actually really enjoy. We get to see people's houses, their pets, their kids. And I just think, that just adds to the connections that we're forming, even though, again, they're digital.
Yeah,
from your
I
perspective,
totally agree with that.
From your perspective, we've, been, enduring the pandemic for well over a year now. What are the differences between virtual events and how you would network at a virtual event versus how you might network in person? And what do we kind of need to keep in mind as we continue to do virtual events?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think a lot of what you just said about letting people in is really interesting because I looked at the networking events in person as a way to mingle and make small talk. And what I think virtual events has allowed us to do is go a little bit deeper. And what I mean by that is to really understand your space and what you're dealing with and empathize and sympathize and connect on, again, a more human level. I'm in my bedroom now with my Peloton beside me, my laundry behind me. I'm just waiting for one of my kids to jump in and say hello. And so I think that like being able to sort of come down to a more human level and really sort of realize that everybody around you is going through the same thing allows you to connect there too. Another thing that I think virtual events allow you to do, maybe in a better and bigger way than the in-person events, is learn how to listen. For me, it's not so much how much you have to say, but the quality of what you say. And I think that listening tells us so much about like-minded people, the people who you feel like after listening to, you would be able to make those genuine connections with. And so you might not be able to, you might not need to speak in the virtual event, but being able to take away what you learned from it and then being able to apply it later when you go back to connect with that person. I also think asking questions, like in a lot of the virtual events, you have the ability, like here through chat and Q&A, to ask questions. And I think that that really shows thought leadership. You're able to get your voice out there, and then potentially, meet some new people.
There's a lot of questions that are kind of popping up into the chat, and we'll get to those in just a bit. But one of the common threads through everything that you're talking about, Patrice, is I think intentionality, authenticity as being something that's really, really important in developing those relationships and being able to have like a strong, robust network of people, not contacts. And I really like how you've woven that in. Are there other aspects of it that you think people need to be thinking about as they're networking with people, like common traits in their approach to networking that they need to be thinking about?
You know what? Truthfully, I don't necessarily think about it as networking as much as I do about connecting. And in that way, it means that you're able to really sort of take away very quickly whether or not that person reflects you in any way, or whether or not there's more to the relationship that you want to build on. I kind of look at it like it's almost like speed dating in a way, where you either have the relationship or you don't. But at the same time, I think it's important that we don't dismiss, because the people we meet along the way are ones that can come back to us. And I mean, for me, it's interesting too, because I have circle of, and I'm talking personal friends that I've had from birth, but then I have friends from elementary school. I have friends from high school. I have friends from university and from my working world and from travel. And your connections that you make in sort of in the business world, they become their own pocket, but that they can also start to bleed into your other circles, which is really interesting too. I mean, I went to school with Alex Newman, who was we showed up at OCAD on the first day. It was our first class together. And of course, we were like the eager beavers who were like the first ones in class. So we connected there. And we ended up doing all of our projects together throughout the years, and we interned together. And then we went our separate ways, because at that point in time, we couldn't find a job together, even though we wanted to work together. So he was my OCAD friend. Until one day he sent me an email, and the email subject line said, "Do you want to go to France for free?" And the email itself was a link to the Young Lions competition. And for those of you who aren't in advertising, the Young Lions competition it takes place in Cannes, and it's part of the Cannes Lions Festival. So it's where they celebrate all of the amazing advertising work throughout the year. And the Young Lions Festival is a way for young creative minds to sort of be a part of that. And it's a contest that you enter through your own country. So for us, it was Canada, where you have 24 hours to crack a brief. And we entered the digital category. So it was this email that he sent me. We ended up entering the digital category. We won for Canada, which meant that we were now going to France to compete against the 36 other countries from around the world who won for their countries. And again, you're given another brief, and you have 24 hours to crack it. And we won there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because people flock to Cannes, to this particular festival, to be inspired by the work. But more than that, to connect with the best in the business from around the world. And so here we were, two kids who graduated OCAD, who couldn't get a job, who didn't even know the first thing about networking, to suddenly being in Cannes with the most unbelievable creative minds in the business, who were all of a sudden wanting to connect with us, never mind us being there to meet them. And so it was all of a sudden this like really interesting shift in perspective of like, oh, maybe we do add value. maybe we are a little bit more than we once thought we were. And I think that the networking became easier, but it also gave us this sense of confidence that that we did have a place. And I think for anybody who feels like they don't, for me, that was a pivotal moment in my life where I suddenly felt like I was, not because of the award per se, but that I was that my work was worth something. And so I felt like I could add value beyond just them sort of adding value to me.
What a great story. Wow, that's incredible. And congratulations. Like, oh, that's what a great way to kind of start off your career even. So the whole theme of today's event, and I know you've touched upon it throughout the conversation, the theme for today's event is the net worth of your network. So before we kind of jump into the audience questions, why don't we touch upon that question?
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit like I'm repeating myself, but for me, it's not the size of your network. It's the strength of the connections you have and being able to use them, but also show them what you can bring to the table. It's quality, it's not quantity, and it's about investing in relationships that will help you, but will also give back in return.
Yeah, that's a great way to sum that up. So why don't we open it up to audience questions now? The first one is coming from Cecilia, where she says that there's so many social media platforms to connect with people: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, email. Do you suggest focusing on one if you can't afford a lot of time to kind of nurture those relationships over those platforms? And yeah, like how do you choose maybe which relationships and which platforms to kind of nurture?
Yeah, listen, I think LinkedIn is a really powerful tool. I think it's a really good gateway to making those connections. And as I said, they're not built in a day. They take time. And so I would say for sure, if you're like looking to connect and build upon that connection, I think LinkedIn is an awesome place to start. And again, not just from DMing, but connecting with the people that you want to through the things that they're sharing, through the things that they're posting, whether it's commenting, liking, messaging them. I think it's a really good place to start.
That's great advice. And we also have a comment from Francesco. He said, Patrice, thank you for sharing. Personalization in communication, invite connections in a timely manner, give to get, human to human connections first, listen deeply, ask questions, interview, and don't box connections into a singular purpose. So I guess he's really like summarizing a lot of what you kind of touched upon. So if you have questions, feel free to kind of put them in the Q&A box and we will touch upon them. I'm also curious to kind of hear from you in terms of like, especially relationships that are blurring the line between personal and professional. Yeah, I see that happening a lot. And what do you do when what do you do when there's conflict in those relationships, kind of thing? Like, how do you maybe handle the conflict in those relationships that are blurring those lines?
I guess I don't know if I see them as conflicts, but opportunities. I actually love when the blend happens. And I mean, I talked about it on Real Start, how my personal connection with a best friend led our agency to work on an organization that she is a part of, which is Real Start. I look at whether it starts off as professional and turns into personal, or starts personal and can weave its way into professional. It's actually a beautiful thing, because I think that like all of those relationships are built on trust, and they are built on the connections you're making. So I actually think it's important and it's lovely. I think blurring the lines is human. Like, I always say when we're presenting, for instance, to our clients, and sometimes they're big presentations and there's a lot of clients in the room, and, let's say the art directors and the copywriters who are taking them through the work that we've poured our heart and soul into, and they're nervous, like, just remember they're at home wearing their pajamas, picking their nose. I think that like there's something to be said of just like realizing that they're people first, and that their title isn't who they are. So you may be like connecting with a president or a CEO or a director, and you might feel like, oh, they're so much bigger than me. They're so much, I guess they're larger than life, and here I am just starting off, or there's no way that I could add value. I think at the end of the day, you're both people, and the stories you have, and I think people forget about sort of the power that they hold within themselves, and that as people, we're all on the same level. So I tend to ask them to forget about the titles and really think about them as people that they can make connections with.
That's great advice. We have Tiana, who is asking, how do we politely say no to requests from our networks without ruining relationships?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I tend to decline requests all the time. And it's not because I look at the requests and think like, oh, this person has nothing to do with what I'm doing, or I decline them because I'm not sure what they want from me. And I'm not sure what I can give to them. And so for me, declining is okay if you're declining because they haven't sort of actually connected with you. I think it becomes a little trickier when they have reached out and it does feel like a really personal message that they're sending you, and they sort of value maybe your perspective or what you could bring to the table. I think those opportunities can sometimes be a little more challenging to figure out how to navigate. But for the most part, I would say, I don't find it difficult when I don't feel like they've actually given anything. If you're simply clicking connect, and you can feel that because they're just trying to increase the number of connections they have and not make meaningful ones, I'm totally okay to say no.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely fair given what you talked about before, like the intentionality of connecting. Speaking of intentionality of connecting, we have Isabel who's asking about how to find connections or partners when you're starting your own business. Like, you have an idea or a persona in mind of people that you want to reach out to. How do you go about finding where they are?
I mean, I feel like if you have an idea of the people you want to reach out to, you should know where they are. And when you know where they are, you know how to connect with them in those spaces. So for instance, if you're on, let's say, Instagram, and there's a way to connect there, I mean, I think it simply starts by commenting or sending them a direct message that really shows them how your relationship can be meaningful to one another. So I think it's about not just saying like, hey, we should work together, but really going deeper to saying why and to showing what you can bring to the table that makes that clear.
So Isabel's saying that she has an e-commerce store for moms. And I think from that perspective, looking at support groups for moms, and like you said, commenting on the content that's posted in those groups, connecting with individual members of those groups to have individual conversations, I think would be a great start for her.
Yeah, 100%.
Our next question is asking about, do you have any tips for helping people get over the nervous jitters of reaching out to their network contacts?
Yeah, I mean, it can be nerve-wracking. Like, I'm not going to undermine the fact that it can, because I've felt that. I felt that definitely early on in my career when I couldn't even, like, I couldn't find a job. And really, for me, it took the confidence of which is weird to like be in France with with the most talented people in the world to really understand and to sort of gain confidence. And so I think in order to get over it, you kind of have to accept it and think about what's the worst that could happen. Because at the end of the day, listen, a connection could change the course of your life. It absolutely could. But I would say, like, for the most part, it's not. So if somebody doesn't want to connect with you, that's the worst that could happen. You move on. Yeah. So for me, it's really about just accepting that, like, it's not the end of the world, and you'll have more wins than you will losses.
I think I would love to add to that, pulling from what you were talking about before, Patrice, about the idea of the intentionality. So if you do your research and you craft your message in such a way that you're clear about what you would like and what you can give in return, I think, that naturally would reduce some of the jitters, in the sense that, it's very purposeful, intentional, well-crafted. And if they still say no at the end of the day, it's, obviously, like, from a mutual benefit perspective, they're maybe not seeing the benefit from their perspective, and just, again, kind of move on. But at least if you take the time to kind of prepare yourself in that sense, then you'll have a better sense of what you bring to the table for that relationship.
100%. And I think too, like, again, it goes back to being like-minded, right? Like, I mean, I'm in an industry that's full of big heads. Like, there's a lot of ego, and it's something that I've been so unattracted to, that I have purposefully made connections with people in the industry that don't have that ego. For me, like, and we talk a lot about this at Fuse, it's good people doing good work for good people. And so if I could surround myself with good people and be a good person, then I feel like you will attract those people anyway. Like, you shouldn't have to try so hard. In some cases, it does just happen naturally.
Yeah, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. I'm going to ask the audience, do you have any other burning questions? We're almost out of time, but we can probably take one more. I just saw one that kind of popped into the chat box. So Francesco is commenting, there's an element in LinkedIn's algorithm that attempts to value connections as meaningful by measuring the level of engagement that we get from our connections. This has driven some advisors to suggest that we only connect with people that are relevant to us, relevant to our work, and limit our brand. This could intentionally or unintentionally result in a network of only like-minded people. What do you think of this, and how do we design our networks such that we don't box all of our connections into a singular box? Great question, Francesco.
That is a great question, which is why I think that, like, in some cases, I mean, the algorithms live across most of what we do online. And so, which is why I think that LinkedIn is a powerful tool, but it's not the only tool. And I think that there's something to be said in other ways to communicate. So if you know of specific people that you have in mind that you'd love to connect with, whether or not you feel like they'd be a fantastic mentor, or whether you feel like they would be a great person to do business with, or whether you think that you could add value to them for a different reason. I think that there's, like, a number of ways to reach out to people and intentionally reach out to those people, and not simply, scroll your feed looking for people. So I think in a lot of instances, it's really doing your research and understanding the people that you intentionally want to communicate with, and then finding those that might fit outside of the box.
I think that's great advice. And again, looking to different platforms for different purposes. And, again, being very, very intentional about the way you go about connecting with those people, in essence. Patrice, this has been very, very insightful. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for joining us today, for sharing your incredible story with us, and your insights about your network and the net worth of your network. I'd also love an opportunity to get some feedback from the audience about how they found the session today. So we're going to launch just a one question poll to see how you found today's event. So if you can let us know what you thought about today's event, that would be great. Some great feedback coming in. Thank you so much, everybody. And
thank you guys so much. This was fantastic.
Really enjoyed having you, Patrice. Really enjoyed it, and you know, gave us a lot of food for thought for how we approach, again, the people. Like I kind of want to move away from the idea of talking about connections and again, putting more of a human face on the people in our networks, because at the end of the day, like you said, it is very much about relationships and having that reminder about connecting with those people, being intentional about how we connect with those people, and making sure, again, that you're providing mutual benefit to both parties or all parties involved, I think is really what I pulled out of today's session. So thank you for that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy days. And just hope that you have a wonderful day. Also want to plug our next event, which is going to be on June 23rd. We're going to have Melissa Maker, who's of Clean My Space. She's going to be talking about using YouTube to build your brand. So make sure that you join us for our next event. Thank you again, Patrice, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
I know Melissa, she's fantastic.
She is, and I'm so excited to be speaking with her next.
That's
Thanks.
awesome. Thank you.